We've been given a stark reminder today of how much we rely on technology, with Telstra experiencing a nationwide outage across its mobile and data network this morning. The AFR reports dozens of Telstra customers began reporting issues at around 5 a.m. on Downdetector. That's a user-reported outage website. That figure escalated to 6,600 by 6:45 a.m. Telstra's Chief Financial Officer and Acting Chief Executive, Michael Ackland, well, he fronted a press conference this morning to update the situation.
At approximately 4:30 this morning, we identified an issue affecting some mobile calls and data services. So the issue is impacting a number of nodes within our network that keep time across the mobile network. And when these nodes are not operating as expected, which is what has occurred, other parts of the network can be affected, resulting in intermittent issues with some mobile calls and data sessions. We've been able now to restore some of these nodes, but that will take time for that to reset across all the thousands of servers across the network. We believe that just under 90% of calls and data services at this point are now working correctly.
Now, a few hours ago, he fronted the media again to update the situation, saying that as of 4 p.m, all of the network issues had been resolved. Importantly, he also confirmed the outage was not a cyber attack.
We are still conducting our investigation into the root cause, but we are confident we have identified a software defect. We've been able to isolate it. We'll provide further technical details of this once we complete the investigation. I want to be clear, this was not the result of a cyber incident. I also want to ask customers to be extra vigilant about calls they receive at the moment by people claiming to be Telstra. We have seen reports of customers receiving calls from fraudsters trying to take advantage of this moment, and our advice to our customers is if you get a call from someone claiming to be Telstra, asking you for details in light of today's outage, please hang up and call us back directly.
Okay, for more on this, I'm joined by Associate Professor Mark Gregory from the School of Engineering at RMIT. Welcome to McKnight Tonight, Mark.
Thank you.
Look, can you explain this issue with the nodes the Telstra CFO spoke about?
So the CFO is talking about a GPS node, and this is essentially a device that's sitting in the network. As we know from GPS, we can get location information, but it's also fed into the to the different systems in the core network. And as it was explained, that this software fault as part of an update to this device caused a time to be desynchronized across part of the core network, which of course then had a cascading effect. We had more devices with the wrong time in them.
Why does that matter so much? Why does it matter if the clocks aren't synchronized?
So in a digital world, one of the most fundamental parts of the digital world is clocks and time. And it's measured to many decimal points. And what happens, of course, is that when we send traffic around a network, time is added to that traffic. So essentially think of a block of information, we add the time to it. And that's important because all of the devices in the network work on the basis of a time limitation. If the information doesn't get to a device by a certain amount of time or processed by a device in a certain amount of time, it will be deleted and taken out of the network. Because we can't have information floating around the network forever, right? It's not like some of our freeways in Australia where you can just keep going around forever. I suppose even a car runs out of petrol at some point in time.
That's true.
So with the digital network, every piece of information has a timestamp, if you like, attached to it. Now, what happens is that if the devices in the network that the information passes through, in the telco world, we have the billing system, the authentication system, we have transit systems, routing systems, and many other systems in the core networks. if the time in the information and the time in these devices is not correct, it can mean that we're going to get large amounts of information rejected. You get a cascading failure and you end up with a network not operating because other systems say, hey, there's something going wrong, we need to stop as well. And so you end up with this thing. Now, why?
So is that like it's protecting itself?
Essentially, yes. And that's what's happened with the railways that were using the telco network to get information from the actual physical railways through to the signalling systems, which used to be in boxes and buildings along the railway. But nowadays, of course, all of that's been moved into data centres. And so the information goes from our railways either over optic fibre or the mobile network and then into data centres where the signalling systems process the information and it's passed back to the physical devices along railways. Now, what's happened today is that there's been a mismatch. A lot of data has been deleted or not got to the destination. And the signalling systems in the data centres have thrown up red flags saying, hey, look, there's something wrong here. Safety's involved. We need to stop the railways. And so whether it was the systems on the railway side or the data centre side, but we've seen red flags thrown up and the railways have stopped.
Yeah,
and so this is the same as what happens with the subsystems where we make phone calls.
Okay, so at the press conference this afternoon, they said that essentially the network has been returned to full strength, but there's always outrage when a telco has technical issues. Is that justified, or do we just have to accept that technology is not always reliable? But I want to preface that by saying before the digital age, the telcos were always reliable. You could have you could have power outages and the like, but you could still pick up the phone and call someone.
The question then becomes, who's more important? Is it the profits of the telcos or the telcos themselves, or is it the customer and safety? Now, we need to remember that the legislation was written in the 90s when the focus was on deregulation, competition between the telcos, not the customer. And so therefore the legislation was written in that way. Now, think back to when the legislation was written in the mid-90s. The internet was just bare bones and new. Mobile phones and smartphones hadn't even been invented in the way that we know them now. All the devices and all the systems. I mean, look, data centers didn't exist in the mid-90s, right?
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of change. But in essence, the Telecommunications Act 1997 hasn't changed. It hasn't been updated to the modern era.
That sounds like government to me.
Well, the telcos are operating based upon the legislation and regulations that they have. Now, I've been calling for 15 years or more, successive communication ministers, endless emails, endless calls for the legislation to be rewritten. And it needs to be rewritten with the customer in the centre, not the telcos, the customer, and things like performance, minimum performance standards, and customer experience need to be in the centre. Now, if that was the case, and then everything was written around that, the problems that we've been seeing in the last couple of years are unlikely to have occurred. The idea that
hang on,
it took
do
so long.
you think that's the case, do you? Because if the legislation had been written around the customer, we wouldn't have these kind of technical issues that we've experienced today.
Absolutely not, because we would have minimum performance standards and we would have requirements. See, one of the biggest problems we have now is that Telstra's done nothing wrong. The only thing that Telstra could fall foul of is in regards to regulations around 000. The fact that millions of customers couldn't make phone calls or do FPOS or anything else, guilty of nothing.
That's actually a really fair point. And let me pick up on the 000 thing, because one of the concerns about this outage has related to 000 calls. Let's have a look at what Telstra's Michael Ackland said about that in this morning's press conference. So I'm going back to the first one. Let's have a look.
Moving to 000 calls. So 000 calls follow a different settings in our network, and therefore they were not impacted in the same way. We have seen a small number of reports that we are investigating, and as part of our standard process, which has been operating through the night and through this morning, we conduct welfare checks when any call to 000 fails.
Now, reports this afternoon was putting that figure at more around 300 people who couldn't get through, but Communications Minister Annika Wells backed up that sentiment when she fronted the media today.
The core system of 000 has continued today. This is not what outage has occurred. The outage is essentially to Telstra's retail network. And as you would all know, there are a lot of customers and small businesses that have been upset by that across the nation today. People should be reassured that the 000 core system continued and that the overwhelming majority of 000 calls have gone through, and that Telstra now, in conjunction with the 000 custodian who I've spoken to earlier today, are working through those remaining welfare checks. And the 000 custodian, I'll say now because I know one of you will ask, is keeping a detailed tick-tock on who knew what when, who was advised of what when, because one of the improvements we wanted out of the Optus outage in September was to get a much better handle on that.
Yeah, Optus have received, they had to pay $12 million penalty for its 000 outage. We were all outraged about the outage. To pick up on your point, it is interesting what you say, that all of the commentary is around the 000 that outage and the effect of that, which is quite serious. But you're right, there is no mechanism for these telcos having to pay a fine or anything like that I'm aware of for the disruption, the major disruption that we've experienced today.
That's right. Because, the consumer is not the centre of the legislation. It's the telcos that are the centre. And competition between the telcos. I mean, the customers are an afterthought. Now, if you look at what's happened today, it was a case of deja vu for me, because the executives always come out and say there were no problems with 000, everything's okay. A small number of people were affected. And then, of course, there might have been a few more. And then, there might have been a few more, but the vast majority, it's not okay. We saw the same sort of language with Optus. So in other words, what you do is that the lawyers are writing these statements for the executives and the minister. And what they're doing is they're drip feeding the bad news to us, right? So that we don't, really get the bad news until the next news cycle, or it's gone off the news cycle. It's a drip feed process of you slowly, incrementally, let people know that maybe the problem wasn't this small, it was a bit bigger and a little bit bigger and so forth. And we have to understand that an army of legal people are writing these statements. And
sure,
we see the use of the word can and could and may and should and so forth.
But meanwhile, businesses have lost a lot of money today. Taxis couldn't take people. People couldn't get to where they wanted to go because they literally couldn't tap with their phone because they couldn't get an internet signal. This does have a huge impact on people, and you've really hit me with this comment about it's not about the consumer. Let me ask you something though. At that press conference, the reporter asked about a text to 000 system that was being trialled. Do you know anything about that and how it works?
Well, essentially, it's exactly as was stated, right? Text to 000, and that was partly so that people could send text to 000 via the LEO satellites, because at the moment you can send text messages to the LEOs, through the LEOs into the network, but you can't make a phone call through the LEOs. That's technology that is still within, coming in the next couple of years. And so this idea of text to 000 has been something that's been talked about for a long time, because, people may not have been able to make a phone call, but they might have been able to make a text message.
It's just when I heard that in the presser with Annika Wells today, I thought, this is actually a good idea, but it sounded like the government hasn't committed the money to it.
There's a number of factors involved in terms of the use of the text system. Now, we're currently going through a process, or the world is going through a process of retiring the SMS system, and we're moving to a digital messaging-based system. So if you remember, in the 3G world, phone calls were using an analog subsystem. And when we moved to 4G and 5G, the analog phone system was retired. Now, SMS was another one of these legacy analog systems, or a separate system to the 4G and 5G data systems. Now, that is currently being migrated. And so the idea of using text messages over SMS, well, it's a case of what system are you designing for, and then how you're going to get it to work. In a data world where there's a lot of priorities and technologies that need to be worked and overcome to get the reliability that you would want. And so, a number of companies and people have been looking at prototyping and how that would occur. And we're not at that point where they believe that it can be implemented in the way that we want it to. But yes, there have been trials ongoing of text messages to 000.
It sounds like a good idea to me. We have people who do voice to text in our comments as they come through, and it is a system people rely on. And so it sounds like a good idea that maybe needs a bit of investment. Associate Professor Mark Gregory from RMIT, thank you so much for sharing your insights on McKnight Tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You can show your support for the show by buying me a coffee. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/McKnight Tonight. Every bit helps keep this show from our garage going.